Hello everybody, my name is Chris Captine with a tutorial for Digital Juice's new product, Drag and Drop. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the damage control and glitch effects products. And if you're familiar with Drag and Drop, then you know how it works, that you use it as an overlay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this broadcast to bring before your wise leaders this single demand: freedom. We are always watching. We are unanimous.
Whoa, that was intense. Everybody all right? Okay, we're going to take a look at creating this hijacked broadcast effect. And I can promise you this guy isn't as scary in real life as he looks here. In fact, if you stick around to the end, I have a bit of a treat to prove just that. So anyway, we're going to be using drag and drop. If you're familiar with the drag and drop products, you know that they're used basically as overlays that you can add to your video and get instant results. But we're going to take it a bit further than that. We're going to be adding some actual distortion to the video, as well as some other elements like this chromatic aberration here, this splitting of the color channels, as well as some lens distortion and color correction, and as well as these large secondary glitches with the time remapping effect. And all of this will be done with After Effects built-in tools, and of course, drag and drop. We're starting off in the juicer just to choose some elements. If you're not familiar with the juicer, there are already a few tutorials on getting started with drag and drop, and I highly recommend that you watch them before continuing on with this tutorial. So I'm using some elements from damage control as sort of the main effects. So I'm just looking for some basic TV static here. So I'm gonna grab subliminal cognition is good as like a noise, main noise kind of thing. Not your day. I like the marginal repair one because I don't know if you can see it here, but there's some faint broadcast bars here which would fit in nicely. Pixel scramble is nice. And I'm going to go over to the glitch effects pack here just for the shorter ones that I can use for sort of those secondary larger glitches. I'll get digital shuffle, chaotic code. I'll grab fading energy, least resistance A, that's pretty intense, but I think it'll work. Smooth interruptions, and witness the glitch. That's pretty awesome. So when you have your elements, you just highlight everything in your batch and you click settings, and then you set up the settings that you need in your output location, and then you just hit render. So here I am in After Effects, and to start off with, I have my raw footage and my audio track that is basically just a ADR voice track with some effects on it and some music and sound effects. And I've locked that layer down. And if you take a look at the original example, we sort of have these larger glitches. And for the most part, they correspond with the sound effects that I've added, those sort of snowy static sound effects. So I've marked in the timeline where those sound effects are and where I would like those secondary glitches to be. And I also have my chosen elements imported from the juicer and organize them into folders. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-compose my footage down into one manageable layer. And I'm just going to choose one of these damage control elements and add it to the timeline. I'll choose this Not Your Day. Now it's too short, so I'm going to go back into the project and I'm going to right click on the clip and choose Interpret Footage. And I'm going to loop it maybe 6 times and hit apply. And it looks like it's long enough if I stretch it out. And yeah, that's plenty. So I probably need to do that with all the clips, but rather than interpret them individually, I'm just going to right click on this one again, interpret footage, remember interpolation, and I'll highlight all these clips, right click, interpret footage, apply interpolation. I'll change the blend mode to screen, and you can see this is already a pretty great effect. In a lot of situations, this may be all you need to do, but we're going to see how far we can push this to really get a creepy effect. First thing we're going to work on is this chromatic aberration, which is the splitting of the red, green, and blue channels. In real life, chromatic aberration happens when your camera sensor doesn't line up the red, green, and blue channels properly. So usually this happens with low quality cameras or with other glitchy broadcast equipment. And we're going to exaggerate it a little bit, and at the same time, try to keep it subtle. I'm going to pre-compose this layer again. I'm going to duplicate this pre-comp 3 times. And the great thing about using a pre-comp is you can replace the footage once you're done, and you can put whatever footage you want in here, or titles, or whatever you want, and you won't have to redo the whole project. Anyway, we have our 3 copies, and we just need to change the color of each channel to red, green, and blue. And to do this, we're going to use the shift channel effect. So on the red layer, we'll apply the effect. And here where it says take red from red, we're going to leave that like it is. But the other 2 channels here, take green from green and take blue from blue, we're going to change those to full off. So now we just have the red channel. And also probably nightmares. Yikes. So we'll turn that layer off and we'll add the effect onto the green layer. And the same thing, we'll leave the green from green as it is, but change the other 2 channels to full off. And then lastly on the blue layer, we'll add the effect again. Leave the blue from blue where it is and turn the other 2 channels to full off. So now we have a blue channel, a green channel, and a red channel. And if you change the blend mode of these layers to screen, you can see that it looks just like our original image. But if I slide one of these channels over, you can see the effects start to appear. And this is what we're going for. But we don't want to just leave it like this. We kind of want to wiggle it around a bit. And we want to give it a sort of symmetrical wiggle so that the red channel only wiggles this way along the x-axis and the green channel only wiggles the other way. And we want them to wiggle equally, just in exact opposite directions. And hopefully that will give us a more realistic effect than just having all the color channels wiggle independently. A little bit more mechanical. One thing we have to do, since we're working with directly opposite positive and negative numbers, I'm going to set the X position and the anchor point of both of these layers to 0. So we'll start with the red channel, and I'm just going to separate the dimensions since we only need to worry about the X position. And we're going to add the wiggle expression to it. And normally when you want to add the wiggle expression, you alt-click on the stopwatch on the position property, and you type wiggle, bracket, frequency, 2 times a second, comma, amount, 100 pixels, close bracket. And you can see when we scrub through this that it is actually wiggling around along the x-axis, but the problem is it's also wiggling into negative numbers, which we don't want. So we need to modify this expression just a little bit. Since we only want it to wiggle into positive values, we need to take the absolute value of this wiggle. And what the absolute value will do is just change any negative value into a positive value. So this expression will wiggle the layer only along the x-axis and only into positive values. And then on the green channel, we're not going to add a wiggle expression onto it. We're going to link this x value to the x value of the red position. We're just going to alt-click on the stopwatch and pick whip the x value of the red layer. And then we're just going to times it by -1. So now you can see what happens is the red layer is only wiggling this way into positive values, and the green layer is wiggling exactly the opposite way into negative values. So whatever the red layer's positive value is, the green layer is going to have the exact negative value. So if we play this back, we can kind of see that we're getting the symmetrical wiggle that we were after. The channels wiggle back and forth and they actually touch, but they never cross over each other. And this is probably too much. I'll just change this down to about 30 and turn the blue channel back on. And that's it. We are done with chromatic aberration. Back out in our main comp, we're going to start to get into the distortion effects. But first, I'm just going to add a bit of color correction to our footage here and darken it down a bit. I'm also going to add some lens distortion here with the optics compensation effect. And I just want to give it a little bit of a fisheye look. But you can see that the edges start to shrink down, so I'm going to correct it with the transform effect. And I'm going to scale it up just a little bit. And I have to use the transform effect because we're going to be adding displacement to this layer. And if we scaled it up with the layer properties, then the displacement would scale up as well, and it wouldn't line up properly with the overlay. And hopefully you'll see what I mean in a little bit. But this way, the distortion happens on top of any scaling we do. I'm just going to choose an element here that I can use for a displacement map. And I'm going to use this subliminal condition. It's just a nice little TV noise kind of thing. And I'll change the blend mode to screen. And on my footage comp, I'm going to add the displacement map effect. And under layer, I'm going to choose subliminal cognition. And we can set our X value here and Y as well. I'm just going to put these down to 0 for a sec so you can see what's happening. So you can see as I start to move this X value, we can see the pixels are starting to move along and get distorted along with this overlay. And you can play with these different properties just to see which one looks the best in your opinion. And that one looks pretty good. And now we see another problem here. If we zoom out, we can see that once we start applying the distortion, it actually pushes the whole layer off the side of the screen. So we're just going to correct that with a simple expression that I learned on Video Copilot. And we're just going to alt-click on this position property, and I'm going to type value minus, I'll pick whip the horizontal value for the X position, comma, pick whip the horizontal value for the Y position, and close bracket. So what this is going to do is it's just going to take the original value and then negate whatever value we set in the displacement just to kind of correct the position a little bit. So I'm actually going to wiggle this horizontal value here just a little bit just to keep adding to the randomness of the whole thing. And I'll turn back on this overlay layer and we're looking good. Just going to change the color of these layers so I know what's going on. And I'm also going to lower the opacity of these layers just a bit. All right, we're getting there. It's a lot of work for a subtle effect, but the subtlety is what's going to sell the effect in the end. So, all right, now we're going to get into that secondary glitch action. So we'll start pulling out elements that we can use for this larger secondary glitch. And we're going to line them up with these markers that we set before. And also, I don't think you'll be able to hear this, but if you hold Control while you scrub in After Effects, you can actually hear the audio, so we can figure out exactly where we want these glitches to occur. So I'm just going to add these elements in, and I'm just going to skip ahead to where I have that all done. All right, I have all these elements chosen, and they're all lined up with the markers that we set before. And you can see some of them have different opacities than the other, just to give it a little bit more variety. So I'm going to pre-comp them down into one layer again, and I'm going to rename it Secondary Glitch Displacement. And we'll change the blend mode. Let's try Add for this one. Then I'm going to duplicate my footage layer, and I'll modify it to be the secondary glitches. And then I'm going to modify the effects on this layer. So I'm going to change the displacement map, the layer setting here, to be secondary glitches pre-comp. And I'll also pump up the values as well. And you can see how the displacement is really pushing the pixels around here and really wrecking the footage in a good way. I'm also going to scale up this transform effect. Again, I have to do it in the transform effect because if I do it in the layer properties, if I scale it up here, you can see that the displacement is actually scaling up as well, and it's getting all thrown out of alignment. So we're going to just stick with this transform effect. I'm also going to brighten it up just a little bit, just to give more of a hint of where he is, just to bring the background in. And then to add the time remapping effect, we're just going to right-click on the layer and go to Time, Enable Time Remapping. Then we're going to Alt-click on the stopwatch and add another wiggle expression. And this one is a little bit different. So we're going to put 2 times per second for 0.8 seconds. And then this third value is a noise value, and we're going to make it pretty high, 5.4. And I'm also going to put a wiggle expression on this position property, just to make it a bit more stuttery and creepy. So let's play it back and see how the effect looks. Looks pretty good to me. So now I'm just going to animate the layer on and off corresponding with my markers. And I'm just animating the opacity, and I'm going to use hold keyframes just so I can turn it on and off quickly and easily. And I'm going to skip ahead again to where I have these all done. So now if we play this back, we can see the distortion effect, and then the overlay kicks in along with those secondary footage and the time remapping effect. Very creepy. All right, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with exactly what is happening here and what everything is doing. So we have our raw footage, and it is using this subliminal cognition noise layer as a displacement map, just for some subtle distortion. Then we have this second copy of the footage, which has been scaled up and brightened up as well, and it is using this secondary displacement pre-comp as its displacement map. And that pre-comp has all the super intense glitch effects elements inside. As well, the opacity of this secondary layer is being animated on and off in time with our sound effects. And we've left all of these digital juice elements visible and changed the blend mode, so they're actually pulling double duty as both displacement maps and as overlays. And so we have a lot of distortion happening with these displacement maps, and the whole point of that is to make it look like the footage is actually bending around these pixels and is actually part of a screen rather than just behind the screen. Hope that all makes sense. All right, just a few finishing touches now. I'm going to add this adjustment layer, and I'm going to add a curves effect on it just to brighten it up. And this is just going to be a flicker. So I'm going to wiggle the opacity 4 times a second for 100%. And I'm actually going to set this starting value down to 20%, just so it kind of creeps up every once in a while. Then I'm going to add a vignette, but instead of the normal way of just using a black solid or an adjustment layer, why not use another digital juice element? So I'll grab this piece, this pixel scramble, and I'll add it to the comp. I'll change the blend mode to multiply and change the opacity down to 50%. I'll add the circular mask by double clicking on the circular mask tool, and I'll invert it, and I'll hit MM to get the mask properties, and I'll feather it like crazy and expand it out a bit. And that's it. Now you have this effect that works great for video, for titles, for anything that you need to make look super glitchy and distorted. And as promised, I have a special treat here. It's actually a recording of an earlier attempt by the hacker group UNANIMOUS to hijack the signal. And you'll see that they weren't quite as prepared the first time around. But before that, I just want to say thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. Once again, my name is Chris Kaptein for Digital Juice. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt this broadcast to bring you this single demand. Wait, what am I supposed to say again? Give me that thing. Give me that freedom. How am I supposed to do? I can't see anything. What? Mom, I'm on the computer! We are always watching. Mom, I'm on the computer!